All right, what's going on? It's Winslow. You've been here before. Welcome back. If you're new here, welcome. Hope you find something useful. So today in this video, we're going to talk about mono compatibility, what it is, why it's important, things to consider, just loads of bits. There's a ton of information about it, like on the internet and stuff. But my point of view, I've been asked by a couple of you on Patreon. And speaking of Patreon, if you want to see videos like this way ahead of time and suggest topics and just get a direct line to me to ask questions, things like that, we have the Bad Snares Anonymous Discord and a bunch of other things just tied into it. Throws a little bit of support my way, and you get things in return. Also, you get to see this beautiful face a lot more. I don't know. If that sounds good to you, hit that link in the description and join in. See you there. Before we get started, I want to say that I am looking at this from a club music focused point of view, meaning like dance music, electronic music production, things like that, things that are meant to be played in a club, festivals, big sound system, things like that. A lot of these things will apply to other genres of music, but for my uses, my focus, this wonderful audience, welcome. Drum and bass, club focused music, bass heavy music, things like that. So what is mono compatibility? Basically, it's just checking your mix to hear whether or not it still sounds good when summed to mono. Now, why do you want to check if they sound good? Well, historically, most club systems have been in mono. Just straight, every speaker is pumping the same thing. But I would say within the last, let's say 10 or so years, a lot of things are modernizing. Technology is much better. It's much easier to, fly a stereo system out in a festival or a club setting or something like that, So it may not be as much of an issue these days as it is, but it's still something to keep in mind, because the last thing you want to do is, play on a mono system, but you have this wonderful track that takes all this care of the stereo field and sounds beautiful and lush, but when it's summed down to one channel, it all disappears and it sounds, but it's really just one of those things to consider. Nowadays, it's not that big a deal. As far as club systems go, you may have some that are straight up mono. You have some that are mixed, like the subs get a clean low end mono signal, and then you have your mains to the left and the right that are actually playing the actual left and right channel. Sometimes you have really big rooms, think of warehouses, think of huge festivals where maybe the front mains on front of the stage are stereo, then the subs are mono. But then you have speakers sporadically placed out in the crowd that are just pumping mono mixes too, just to reinforce the sound. So basically you have all these different kinds of setups that are available to you that you have no control over. So you want to make sure what you're making translates. All right. Saying that, I've played in hole-in-the-wall clubs with really cheap Behringer PA system, and I've played on the big festival circuits and stuff, and you can't control that kind of stuff. You just do your best. You can tell immediately when you're playing a tune out and it doesn't work on a big system, or it doesn't work on a crappy system, or it doesn't, but you can't control those things. Okay, so some things to consider when thinking about mono compatibility and whether or not you should actually care about it. First things first, are you producing music mainly for the club environment? And I know I said it first, I'm talking about club focused music and things like that, but you can still have, danceable music that isn't necessarily for the clubs, or you can have a blending of the two. Let's say you're making a lot of, for drum and bass purposes, jump up. That's for the clubs, right? Of course, we listen to it at home, but primarily it's for clubs, DJing, right? You might not care about the stereo field and things like that. It could be straight down the middle. Or opposite of jump up, well, different. You can have something soulful, stripped back, liquid. Think Caliber. A lot of his mixes are very narrow, very mono. For a club environment, club focused music like drum and bass, that's okay. Then you can have someone like Micah's, who is very listener focused and not so much club, he doesn't DJ all that much himself. But when you listen to his music, it's very full depth. Things are happening to the left, things are happening to the right, things are wide. And while it still works in a club, it's more for the listener. It's more for the, sitting back headphones or your own audio system at home kind of thing. So there's a difference, okay? So you have one hand straight for clubs, definitely mono compatible. If you want things to hit in the club, and more often than not, some of those setups will be mono, then consider it. If you're only listening at home, doesn't matter so much. It really doesn't. Again, you can have both. You can have something that hits well in the club and then hits well at home. That's what I go for. Personally, mono compatibility does not really matter to me because I know most of the people who listen to my music are listening in their own personal environments, where they're home, on headphones, earbuds, one earbud in while you're doing some dishes, things like that, like personal consumption. My tunes get played out in clubs and at festivals and stuff, and I make sure they're still compatible, they still hit hard, all that. But me personally, I'm always writing for the listener in mind. Ultimately, it's all about what you want. How do you want things to sound? Does it sound good to you if it's super wide but doesn't work in mono? Does it sound good to you if it's just the whole tune is dead mono and you're not worried about left and right and all this stuff? It really is up to you, but mono compatibility is one of those things to consider when your music may be played in a myriad of environments. Again, just like mastering, you make sure things are consistent, so no matter what system it's played on, it should relatively sound the same. All right, so now we're talking about production side. Let's talk about some tools you might need. First off, your ears. Your ears tell all, no matter what any tool I'm about to suggest says. 100% it's up to your ears, okay? Now, in some cases, if you don't know what to listen to, these tools are gonna help. But once you do learn and kind of see what they're doing, you get used to this practice, it becomes second nature. You're not gonna sit here and be like, is this mono compatible? Is this it doesn't, because it doesn't matter, all right? And you'll learn to listen to what is and isn't and what potentially will be a problem and all that kind of stuff. But first thing you want like a utility plugin, something that will help you in the DAW, like just collapse the stereo image to mono. You can take a stereo imager, make it mono, like in Ozone, things like that. Ableton has like a mono button. I know Studio One has a little red button I can click that makes it mono or stereo. Loads of plugins. Google is your friend. Your DAW probably has something already. Second thing you're gonna want is some kind of analyzer. Most of them, from like Span to Ozone and it'll probably have a little graph called correlation meter, which will have a -1, a 0, and a +1. Those things will help. I'll show you a couple in a second. But again, your ears are what matter most. So hope you got a good set of ears on you. Couple things, since this video is going out on Patreon. First, if you follow the link in the description, I'll have it linked to this whole write-up. So in case, I'm not explaining it in a way or you're not picking it up, I'll have it written out and everything. Yeah, let's get in the DAW. Let's talk about some things, all right? Anyway, we're in the DAW. Here's a project I am just about wrapped up on. I did a couple videos on like how I built drums and stuff in it. And yeah, that's not important though. So right here, we have one of the first tools. It's called a phase meter. So if I play some audio through it, you'll see kind of how it works. So that's all you get to hear for free. Anyway, so you can see kind of how things are set up. Like you have mono right down the middle, and then you have stereo information. You have left and right and all these things. So if I play, let's say I play the snare, right? Snare's pretty centered. It has some stereo information, so it isn't one single line. If I sum it to mono, yeah, you can barely see it. It only shows up as a line. Again, if you look down here, this little red button, that's Studio One's version of collapsing the mono. I like it. It's very convenient. Let's say I sum to mono. Again, a little button. It's going through some reverb, so it's going to show a little bit of something. But now I'm going to pan it hard left. See, now it's showing the left channel. If I pan it hard right, it shows that. Okay? Now you kind of get that. Now if I play something, a more complex wave, let's look at one of these bass sounds. See, it's not dead left or right. It's a mix of the two with different amplitudes. So it shows up as like this complex shape. So this tune has a pretty wide bass sound. You hear it already. And in this section too, same idea. And I say bass sound because functionally it's a bass sound. Because if I add the sub in, you get a full figured sound. It's cut basically in 2 layers. So I have like the mids and the higher end, and I have the low end. So check it out together. And if I take off that little top, like wider part, you have a dead mono sound. If you look down here, the correlation meter, I'll try and zoom in, but over here, yeah, it's dead mono, so it's basically one. One means fully mono, basically, like left and right are more or less the same, so you know it's the same sound. It's a centered sound, okay? But if I do this one, you see it's teetering. It isn't fully the same, so it's not one, but it's not wildly different either. Now, if I take something like look at what am I looking for? This, and I make the width even wider. So we go mono, right? Like it's trying, but it's going through a few plugins. It's not going to make it completely. But if super wide now, yeah, it's getting even worse. Worse, I say. Now if I'm stack another few on there, let's see if I can really make it wide. Yeah, now in that case, it's entirely too wide. It's way out of phase. It's disgusting. So, with it being out of phase, what happens if I collapse the whole image to mono? Let's check it. It basically disappeared, right? Because it was so wide. There's so much phase cancellation going on because the differences between the left and the right channel and the way waves are is basically disappeared. Like there's no lines anywhere. It's more or less canceled itself out. That's what monocompatibility is all about. It's that when you collapse your stereo image to mono, is it still sounding good? Is it still there? That's basically what we're worried about. So I'm gonna play this and I'm gonna one by one take all those like stupid stereo images I just stuck on. Let's see what happens. Took out one, nothing. Took out another, nothing. It's starting to sound a little bit better. One more. Now, as far as the meter is concerned, to be fair, not much happened. But again, we're talking about listening. What did you hear? You heard it go from really like unfocused, almost like a shadow of a sound, to a more or less full-bodied sound again. And that's because the work I've put into it, making the sound, kind of EQing a little bit of the mid-side to make the stereo image a little different. It's compatible. Again, what I try to also do in these videos is, again, think about context, okay? So the context of the entire tune is, does it sound good when it's stuck down to mono, all right? So the whole tune, mono, right? Everything's still there, right? Because if I unmono it, does anything really disappear? No. There's a lot of wide stuff in this track. So if we don't even talk about bass, let's talk about like pads, atmosphere kind of thing. Like this intro sound is a pad, it's some field recordings, it's a lot of delays and reverbs. It's a very wide and kind of amorphous sound. Check it. If we check our meter, we see it's hovering around. Correlation still positive. Honestly, if your correlation is positive, meaning towards 1 and not negative, in a negative between 0 and 1 and not -1 and 0, that's mostly how all these meters are, you're good. If it's going opposite, below 0 and in the negatives, that means some things are out of phase, and when you submit, you go to mono, it's going to sound gross. When you go to mono, key thing, it's going to sound gross. But if you only listen in stereo, think about your environment like I talked about earlier. That doesn't matter. I don't really care either. So, all good there. If I sum it to mono, does the same effect come across? It's that pad, which is important for the melodic content. Does that come across? Does the atmosphere, is it there? Is it present? That's all I'm really caring about. Like, again, it's an effect in this context of atmosphere. Pad's still there. I still get some atmosphere. I'm happy, okay? It's mono compatible. If I play this out in the club on a mono system, a little hole in the wall box of a club with some PA, some PV or Behringer, you know what I mean? It'll still sound all right. So one thing to consider is, how are you getting a stereo sound? Is it naturally stereo, or do you have like artificial stereo widening? Like you're doing some tricks in the time domain of like delaying one channel, panning it this way. Just hit the mic like an idiot. Delaying one channel, panning it the other way. Well, what's called Haas effect. Okay, let me show you some examples on that and some things that might come up. So if I go in here and there's a specific sound, like a tambourine sound, and I wanted it wide, I don't want it down the middle, because this is kind of a thick mix as far as everything that's going on. All right, so no plugins, sounds like this. Pretty stereo, pretty down the middle. It's fine, you know. But what I did, stack some plugins on it, and then this plugin, which is kilohertz, Haas effect. I'm gonna make it big because why not? I love like plugins that scale because it just looks goofy to me. Anyway, so what it does is basically kind of duplicates the sound, delays the left channel a little bit more than the right channel, so you get the stereo effect. It's not true stereo, it's an effect. Okay, so let's listen to it without and now with. Yeah, now you can see the correlation meter. So without, it's all right, you know. But with, it's zero. It's hovering around 0. So I can go like this, pull the timing down. Still hovering. More drastic timing. Now you're really getting a distinct left and the right. Like the left is hitting before the right? So you're getting out of phase, negative correlation. What does that mean when you collapse a mono? Well, here we go. Timing issues. And now they're like messing with each other. But if I take it back to where I had it, where it's kind of even, basically it's what I'm getting at. It's starting to cancel. Like it's not, it didn't disappear. But you can hear like that kind of comb filtering effect, and it's hard to describe what that is, and it's a timing thing. But let me like mess with this knob real quick and we'll see visually how it is. So remember that big delay? There you go. That kind of like a phaser, right? So basically 0 and below is out of phase, but how wildly out of phase is going to be from 0 to -1. Because when we went super time delayed, it goes negative, right? Together, gets closer, gets closer, gets closer, gets closer. Some to mono, out of phase. There we go. So things like that, like artificial stereo widening, you will have to consider like how far you're pushing it. Because in most cases, it will kind of knock itself out of phase when some to mono. If you're only listening in stereo, though, who cares? A little bit of delay, it's not going to matter. You're not going to hear that comb filtering. Yeah, those are kind of the only scenarios, again, in where like you really kind of have to worry about things. Like you'll figure this out. Again, it's very much a club focused thing. And it's not really that big a deal anymore. Like you can have things wildly out of phase, and if it sounds good, it's fine. Think of like any ambient album, probably a lot of out of phase stuff. Okay, really doesn't matter. It just doesn't. So again, mono compatibility. I'm gonna mess up. I'll just keep that in. I keep messing up mono compatibility. I swear, there's like 20 takes of me messing it up. Anyway, it's just something to consider. It's not some hard and fast thing that really matters. It's all about what you want in the end. But for the sake of having your song translate to different environments outside of the one you work in, you want to check it. Okay? For club music, any other kind of music as well. It's just one of those things to keep an eye on. If you send your tunes off to get mixed by somebody, they're going to check it. Mastering engineers always check it. Sometimes I get notes back to where it's like, hey, this is a little too wide and you might have issues. You could do a quick fix and, you know, we'll run it back through and master and all that kind of stuff. Because again, it's all about translation. So hopefully there's a few checks in case you miss out on something. But ultimately, if you want it to sound how it sounds, and it sounds how you want it to sound, and that's a real round way to say it, then you're good. But it's something to consider. So that's mono compatibility. Yeah. Hope you found some use to this. Let me go edit this down so it makes it coherent. video. And yeah, again, there's a whole write-up if you want to check the link in the description once this hits YouTube, which will be a while from now. So yeah, as usual, any other questions, let me know, comments, social media, things like that. If you want these ahead of time and specific things tailored to your questions, become a sub on Patreon and drop me a message. But until then, I'm going to make some more tunes. This one's wrapped up. It's going on the next EP, which is probably going to be out before this video is live for non-Patreon members. And then a full like breakdown of this whole thing, you know, because content. Anyway, I've been Winslow. I'm keep being myself. You keep being you. See you in the next one. Later. But the main thing for monocompatibility. So what is monocompatibility? So what is monocompatibility? So what is monocompatibility? Oh, but